Friends, I'm so pleased that you're here in the room, and those who are still in Wolf Tumim Hall. There are plenty of meatballs and egg rolls, and they're all welcome. So please come and join us for some conversation that continues. We are really delighted that we have this privilege this weekend to share time with Dr. Rehfeld, and not only to share time with Dr. Rehfeld, but I wanted Dr. Rehfeld to meet you and to hear from you and hear your questions. But I think as you began to hear about the important role that Reform Judaism has played and continues to play, we use the word transformation more and more because we're at a time of transformation. And if any of us endured through pandemic, and we have obviously, but all of us was changed. None of us is really the same person that we were a few years ago. And so we anticipate change, but now we have to know, what is it? What will it look like? And who's taking us into the future? Well, I'm glad that Dr. Rehfeld is here to take us into the future. And I want to ask Dr. Rehfeld a leading question, which he can respond to, and then we also want to give you an opportunity to ask questions as well. Dr. Rehfeld, you've been a part of Hebrew Union College for really a short time. And as president, you've come to know alumni, rabbis, cantors, educators, graduate students, etc. I'd like to know from you, as you've come to learn some of the obvious challenges, but also the rich history of HUC, what gives you hope about Hebrew Union College's future?
What a great way to begin a conversation. And as I do, and I'll come back to that, I want to share with you what I said to Rabbi Lyon just a moment ago. You've got something great going on here. And I go to a lot of congregations. It's part of the gift of my job is to visit places and to be with communities. Everyone is wonderful in its own way, but you have something special going on here. And when I see what you are doing, what I'm seeing what the graduates are doing, the potential of Reform Judaism to engage people and transform communities, that gives me hope. And it is a hope that's based on our history. And it's a history that transformed seminary education by demanding that it follow an academic model of scholarship rather than a yeshivish model of rabbinic training. And we have grown with that, and we will continue to grow for that. And I see how our faculty and how our students and how our staff responded to COVID and responded to being thrown everything online. And to take a class and move it online, it's not just doing what you did in the classroom and moving it online. It takes innovation, it takes thought, it takes creativity. And especially when you're doing it in the first few weeks, it takes patience and it takes compassion for one another, because none of us was doing this well. None of us. We were all struggling to see the persistence, the perseverance, and the resilience of our faculty and our students and our staff and our alumni you were holding your congregation, David, and yet they were there for us and for each other. That gives me tremendous hope.
Well, I'm glad. And the truth is, and I think you've come to know it, that the Reform movement is not so tied to halacha, to Talmudic dictums, that we can't be flexible. We haven't thrown anything out. We simply resolve to understand the past in order to build the future. Reform Judaism is nimble enough to turn and pivot the way that we have. But despite the hopes, there are worries. And there are challenges. And I'm not sure that everybody knows that at HUC there are 4 campuses. The original one, Cincinnati, New York, Los Angeles, and the one in Jerusalem, where all rabbinic, cantoral, and education students begin their training. What does it mean, though, to lead 4 substantial campuses, and what does that mean for transformation in the future? I'm asking Dr. Rehfeld an obvious question that he knows the answer to already, but I want him to share with you, how do we sustain it? How do we transform it? How do we benefit from what we've learned even through the pandemic about technology to tie it all together?
Well, what it means to be asked to lead it is that, or to say yes to lead it, is that I'm crazy, is what If we were to begin what we're doing today, we would have one or maybe two locations. One location in North America, maybe a second, our own in Jerusalem, but maybe we'd partner with someone else. We wouldn't build an institution from scratch right now. But to me, what this moment means, because I don't believe we should be giving up campuses. I don't believe we should be shutting things down. I believe, and what the board has affirmed, is a vision of one HUC, a single global institution that leverages our resources across the globe to make change and effectively do the three parts of our mission. Leadership development, which includes clergy and educators and nonprofit leaders, et cetera. Scholarship, and particularly scholarship around translating Jewish wisdom into the field. And number three, public education. Programs like this, except with our faculty, with our on HUC Connect, which is an online platform which gets to technology, and to stop doing things redundantly, but really have centers of excellence wherever we are. Our graduates are in 30 different countries around the globe. I don't know if even you know that. 30 different countries. And yes, Canada is one of them. That counts as one, but 29 and 28 outside North America, outside this. How are we using technology? Number one, COVID was an amazing opportunity. It was a tragedy. It was awful. And it afforded us an opportunity to rethink what we're doing. When I came to this role from Washington University and from the secular university side, I asked the question, why aren't we doing more of our education online? Because this is a trend, particularly for graduate education, that's just been accelerating over the last 10 years. And in fact, what I learned is we pioneered in the Jewish community an executive master's program for educational masters to help people learn educationally. And I think David Scott is a graduate of that executive MA program. So what would it mean to do that for all of our programs? And the initial reaction was, we can't do that. We can't do that. COVID came. We can do it. And you want to know something? If I had said we're going to teach and train online 20 years ago, you would have been right to say, wait a second, we can't learn on our conference call lines, on our phones, on our desks. But now we have Zoom. And if I ask us not to prepare, and I'm asking our faculty, don't design a program for Zoom, design it for what the technology is going to be 20 years from now, when we are on virtual reality, or we are in immersive experiences. This isn't going to replace in person, because there's nothing that can replace the person-to-person what's happening now, but it is going to supplement it and be another path, another on-ramp to Jewish leadership and Jewish scholarship and education.
Right, and the question that I'm preparing to ask you really addresses the fact that as much as we're preparing for a Reformed Jewish future filled with transformational change and leadership, for rabbis to lead Reformed congregations and cantors and educators and so forth, the real question is, where do they come from? So I put it to the congregation and to a search committee before Cantor Feibush joined our congregation. They said, oh, let's go find a cantor. And we know exactly what we want. And I said to the search committee, there is no vending machine filled with cantors where you push D2 and you get the cantor that you want. It's a very limited world. So it's a limited world of cantors. How fortunate we are that we did get D2 out of the vending machine. And Kenny Feibush is here. But the same scarcity exists among excellent rabbis to serve excellent congregations. And I've said to my clergy team that the future of Judaism relies on excellence. It's not going to thrive on mediocrity. We need the best trained, best prepared Jewish professionals. But where do they come from? So I'd like Dr. Rehfeld, if you would explain what it's going to mean for rabbis, cantors, educators, if they can learn online and not always be in residence on campus for 4 years in addition to the beginning year in Jerusalem, how that will feed the proverbial pipeline and prepare us to serve congregations like these.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the pipeline is a term that we use for people before they decide to come in, and then there's the pipeline continues out into the world. So for the first place is that we have lots of communities that have needs for rabbis where we just don't have enough rabbis being trained, and that's not at HUC. We are the largest seminary in the liberal world. We have 17 incoming rabbis coming in as students, and JTS, that's our sister institution, has 7, and AJU, which is a sister institution in LA, has 4. This is what we're talking about, an overall challenge with on-ramping. The place that we're seeing growth, the place that we're seeing that's attracting places is seminaries that are cropping up online, or they're doing more of their work online. AJR, which just was accredited, is a fine seminary. It's a different kind of a model of training, and they're online. So what I think is going to happen is it's going to allow us to serve communities where you have people already residing there, wanting to be trained. The example, the paradigm that I give is a 35, 40, 45-year-old lawyer, with no offense to any lawyers in the room, but lawyer who says to themselves, you know what, I went into this career, I feel so passionate about my Jewish community. I'm living in Seattle, I have a partner, I have a house, I have 2 or 3 kids, I can't leave, but I need to make a career change, and I want to serve. I want to serve our people. I want to do something of meaning and purpose. I'm a Reformed Jew. There are needs in Seattle. And right now what our movement is saying is, good luck. Come and move your whole family. Your spouse has a job. That's different than 40 years ago, 50 years ago. We need to find on-ramps to them to provide on-ramps back to their own communities and begin to build out a depth of leadership for more mature students also.
Absolutely. And what happens is that there is that 35 or 40-year-old who wants to make a career change, a profound career change, to become a rabbi, a cantor, an educator. And if one of the requirements is that you have to move your entire family to Jerusalem for a year and then to another campus, it's completely impossible. But a program that HUC is beginning to envision will not only enable such people to fulfill their own human potential, but also deliver the goods, so to speak, to the profound Reformed Jewish future that we're trying to build. And if only 17 students are coming in this year, which sounds like not too many, although it's more than other institutions, it's about half of what was my incoming class when I began rabbinical school in 1985. And in those days, it really was primarily a young person coming out of college and going straight into rabbinical school. But today there are so many others, and we have many more means to reach them.
I just want to add one other piece to this. Not only do we have more means to reach them, but we also have a movement, that we have a network of institutions all aligned with values, all aligned with our aims, that we can do in-person work wherever people are. We won't be able to offer a virtual program to somebody that is in the middle of a place where there are no Reformed congregations or institutions, but to someone in Houston, if we could convince Rabbi Lyon to be a mentor, or Rabbi Scott to be a mentor, and start building through internships and field placements in place with cultivating a community, because so much of seminary education is clergy formation. It's a formation model through relationship and through contemplation and the kind of work that you need for pastoral care to raise up your character that has to be done in place.
Absolutely. And it is that formation. We look very often among the youngest students. Look at the B'nai Mitzvah tonight. Daniel and Andrew, they don't both have to be rabbis. One can be a rabbi, one can be a cantor, we don't know. But we really do put our finger on certain students, proverbially speaking, and really identify who has the wisdom, who has the acumen and the ability to grow into that kind of leader. And sometimes we get it, but it really takes a lot of effort. And we have to train a congregation and families too to understand that these jobs that we do, although they take a lot of time and effort, for the right person is extraordinarily meaningful. So to say to your parents, I want to be a rabbi one day, is not a silly thing. Although when I said it to my father, he said, are you sure you're going to be able to support yourself? Which was his way of saying, I don't want to support you for the rest of my life. So we do have to identify young people and older people too and encourage them in the direction to become Reformed Jewish leaders. Dr. Rehfeld, I'd like to open the floor to questions and thoughts, because these are thoughtful people as I've come to know them, and I'm sure you would like to hear their questions too. David has a microphone. Lawrence?
What is the status in the United States of the reform movement? I'm not as familiar with cities around the country. In Houston, we have a lot of congregations. I don't know whether we're typical, atypical, or what.
The reform movement, and by that I think you're talking about the institutions of the reform movement, the number of congregations. The number of congregations overall is on a declining number over the last 20 or 30 years. And that follows by about 20 years an overall decline in religiosity, including in the Christian world as well. So we have to understand we're living in an increasingly secular environment in which there's a lot of decline of religious life. That's number one. Number two, at the same time, more Jews identify as Reform Jews than any other kind of Jews. As we have about 2 million Jews that identify as I'm Reform. But on the other side, there are only about 750 or 800,000 individuals who are joiners of congregations. So that just means what's the gap of about 1 million, 1.2 million? Some people who just say, well, I'm a Reform Jew, and just mean, oh, I'm not much of a Jew. I'm sure you know people that say that. But others who do identify as Reform, they accept our values, they accept the Enlightenment approach to Judaism I was beginning to outline. They are animated by doing justice in the world. They've gone to our camps, they attend our programs, but they're not joiners. So I would say 1 million, 1.5 million Jews identify and are active as Reformed Jews, and it is more than any other denomination in the United States. So on that it's a tale of two cities. On the one hand, we are facing the overall trends. On the other hand, we remain vibrant and vital. Hundreds of congregations, over 750, maybe 800 congregations around the country.
And Lawrence, I would add, one of the concerns that people often ask me is, how do we get young people in? So I will tell you that young people are very busy doing other things. And when they have children, they generally then identify that they need to do something Jewish for their children. So what happens to 20 and 30-year-olds? They become 30 and 40-year-olds, and 40 and 50-year-olds. And actually, we see them come around. And our membership, we add new members every month to the congregation. It's unbelievable. Even during COVID, we had new members. And when you look at the arc of ages of the people who are joining the congregation, we feel satisfied that we're welcoming younger, and we're also welcoming older for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is that we have something for everybody when they come in.
To link that up, because this is a very important phenomenon that you just mentioned, David. Millennials are the first generation that significantly delayed adulting. And I have 2 millennial kids, and they continue to delay adulting. But what that has meant is that the delay by 10 or 15 or sometimes 20 years of the starting of families. And it's when families start that people tend to join congregations. So part of what we're seeing in the decline is epiphenomenal. That is, it's a result of another thing that's happening, of people just delaying the start of their families. And I suspect what you're seeing here, we're just beginning to see as the millennial generation is now entering their 40s with their kids just beginning preschool and wanting to connect, and I believe you're going to see a return, and congregations like this will benefit.
Yeah, and you know, and when we have a low bar mitzvah year or a high bar mitzvah year, we always ask ourselves, what was going on 13 years ago? And that often provides some data points for us to understand. I think Stanley had a question.
About 3 years ago, I decided I had to do something since I've been retired for a number of years.
Get just a little closer. Thank you.
Okay. So I started subscribing to what they call great courses, which is it's actually done by a company called the Teaching Company. And they provide courses in different parts society, humanity. And they have a number of courses on Judaism, from ancient Judaism to Jewish theory to God, you name it, across the spectrum as far as Judaism. And it's exactly what you're talking about. They get famous professors, and they break the curricula up anywhere from 12 to 36 episodes, which are 30-minute lectures. And they have different graphic arts and stuff like that to depict what they're providing as far as intelligence. And I tell you, in the last 3 years, I've learned a lot more about Judaism than I ever learned at Beth Israel. Sorry.
You went to religious school at the wrong time, Stanley. But Dr. Rehfeld, we'll give you all, we'll print it for you. The website at HUC has really remarkable programs online. So in addition to the Great Books program, which many people are familiar with, you should also find some access to Reform Jewish scholarship at HUC.
As we're talking about changes that have brought us to today and anticipating what kind of changes are coming in the future, I wondered what the large influx of women rabbis have brought to the scene and what you anticipate, or it doesn't matter whether they're women and men, they're all the same, or is there some effect of the large number of women rabbis in a short period of time?
So the answer is a sensitive answer. And I want to be frank and I want to be candid, but I also want to just recognize that whenever you're talking about gender and the influence of changes of gender, it's a sensitive topic. So what I'm about to say, I mean to do so in a sensitive way, and if I say anything that offends or that otherwise presses on toes, please let me know, and I want to just say that in advance. So first of all, there are different views about gender, about if gender, is there a women's approach to this or not? And for those who think that there is, if you have more women in a profession, it means the profession has been feminized, more compassion, more feminine, whatever characteristics. For those that don't believe that there is such a thing, that that's socially constructed, we shouldn't expect to see any changes. So number one, however you view that, you would expect that to change. The second thing that has changed, which I think is for entirely, and I think that's good, and I mean, just naming that in terms of what you'd asked. But the second piece is that by allowing women in the rabbinate, which came 50 years, well, it came 2,000 years too late, but 50 years later than the first rabbi. You know, Regina Jonas in the 1930s was the first woman rabbi in Germany. She was annihilated in the camps in the Holocaust. But Sally Priesand was ordained in 1972. And what that did was open the doors to say that we as a movement were treating people equally and access to leadership. And that's just been transformative because it's allowed our congregational leadership to reflect the communities and bring a diversity of voices and experience into leadership that is necessary. Now, there is a concern, and Nancy Chorterow, I think is the name of a feminist theorist in the 1970s, that noticed sociologically that when professions shift from male to female, there is status implications of that. And it is a challenge. How do you maintain that? That reflects the sexism of our world. It's not something that we embrace. In fact, we're fighting it at HUC by moving to salary transparency and doing all of the sort of basic things that we have to do to fight and to lead with gender equality. But it's something that you as a congregation need to keep your eye out on. How do you raise and maintain status of women rabbis, et cetera? The final thing is that while having more women in the rabbinate has attracted more women to the rabbinate, it does ask a man, are you as attracted to the rabbinate if you see it feminizing, if it's becoming? And so we are very sensitive and committed to diversity of our student body. And that means today, not only diversity of Jews of color and of people with their sexual orientations and the range of things, but also to make sure that we're fielding classes that also have men. because women are seeking the rabbinate, and we're delighted by that. Let's increase our numbers, and let's increase the diversity, not by decreasing our numbers, but by increasing the number of men that we're having. But right now our classes are running about 50 to 60% women, which I think is entirely appropriate and a good thing. Is that it? I sort of went off on a bunch of tangents. It was a fascinating question.
No, and I think you answered it very well. And the truth, Ruth, is when I began rabbinical school in 1985, my class was already 50% women. And I don't know if that remained constant for many years, but I would say that Rabbi Scott has been a remarkable reflection of what diversity in the rabbinate is all about. And I sit on the CCAR board. I've been on the board for many years. And the diversity around the table is important to the CCAR, that we have men and women, LGBTQ, we have Jews of color, etc., so that we really are aiming to represent our movement as a diverse movement that is more indicative and reflective of the country as a whole. And Dr. Rehfeld, you should know, we have a sociologist in town named Stephen Kleinberg, who wrote a book called Houston, the Prophetic City. And his claim is, and we trust him, thousands of people come out to hear him every year to talk about Houston. And he's a wonderful man. And he said by 2050, the rest of the country will look like Houston. So we're already there. The diversity that we see every day and in all the places that we go will be seen all over the country. So we're getting a good taste of what diversity means and, frankly, how well it works in most cases. Yeah. Go ahead, and then Bobby.
The Haredi community is growing, and the liberal community, as you said, is going down. What are they doing right, and what are we doing wrong?
Right is all in the eyes of the beholder. What are they doing effectively? How about that? Okay. First of all, the numbers of, first of all, I believe we should start using appropriate language to describe people who believe that their faith comes first in experiencing the world, and that believe in a literalist interpretation of Torah, and that do not believe that individuals have the right to make moral and religious decisions for themselves, but have to be trusted into religious clerics. And we need to call that fundamentalism, even when it's our own. So you can call them Haredi, but people that have those views and are, by the way, not tolerant of Reform Judaism as an approach to Judaism, I believe it's a fundamentalist approach. And whenever you have fundamentalist communities, you have a clear worldview. It's a worldview with clear authority that's attractive, that's appealing, that's very easy to replicate. And so what they're doing effectively is adopting the closed society of fundamentalist culture. You saw perhaps the New York Times did an expose of a community in, I think it was New Jersey, Lakewood perhaps. It was that. Well, yeah, where the secular education of the kids is just non-existent and it's being supported by the state. It's being supported by your money, by public funds. We need to stand up to that. We need to love them as Jews, and I have a whole other talk about why you should still love Jews and prioritize the Ahavat Yisrael and a responsibility, but we don't have to accept that approach. So what they're doing effectively is not what I think is morally acceptable. And just let's not overstate the fact that they're doing it well and effectively. The numbers are still pretty darn small. So I'm not as concerned about that as I am about making our communities open, raising up the values of God, Torah, Israel through an enlightenment lens that is Reform Judaism, as you know, and love them as Jews and not necessarily love the Judaism.
Yeah. Bobby.
Oh. Keep it close to your mouth. Anything else, Warren? Can you tell me what the Hebrew Union College's official position on interfaith marriage is?
Official position. The reason that I'm pausing is I don't believe we have an official position on it, but I'll take your question more expansively, but I like to answer things very precisely because we tend not to take positions on things. As an academic institution, we want many flowers to bloom. We want people to be to have discourse. we're part of the Reform movement, and the Reform movement celebrates interfaith relationships. It celebrates them as a meaningful expression. We focus on behavior and people that want to make commitments, and we also know that the movement includes people that find that very challenging and aren't as open for it. But we don't have a position on interfaith marriage itself.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I said I grew up here in Houston, and I remember a time when Reform rabbis would not perform interfaith marriages. So what changed?
Yeah. So I can tell you that not from an HUC point of view, but once we graduate and are ordained from HUC, we become members of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the CCAR. And within the CCAR, there was not necessarily a rule, but an unwritten rule that said that no rabbi worth his salt, and I say he because it was mostly men, would officiate at an interfaith wedding. So I'll give you an anecdote, is that when I came to be the assistant rabbi here to work under Sam Karf, Sam recognized the trends that were happening, that there were nice young Jewish kids meeting non-Jewish kids and wanting to marry. So what he said is, if you would have a judge officiate at your wedding, I'll be present to offer a blessing, but I can't officiate. So when I came to learn how to do this, he said, this is what I will permit you to do. So one generation was training the next generation. But then what happened is those trends continued and they got more immersive within the community. When I became a senior rabbi for the first time, 10 years later, I decided that by studying the issue, researching the data, and really experiencing it within my own extended family, I said, this is wrong. We need to lower the barriers to entry. We need to widen the tent and welcome those people who are committed to a Jewish future. And it was Dr. Jonathan Sarna, who once was my rabbinic thesis advisor, he was a professor at HUC, now at Brandeis University, who said that you can measure the future of Judaism not by Jewish children, but by Jewish grandchildren. And so if we welcome interfaith families and model by way of the parents and the grandparents what the children can do and be as Jews, then we have a future. It may not look like the standard model that used to produce the Jewish future, but it can work. And so what I've said to interfaith couples and to the parents of those couples is, to the Jewish partner in particular, is it's time to up your game. It's time to be more of a Jewish role model so we can raise Jewish children. So today there are rabbis who will do interfaith weddings. I do under certain circumstances. There are those who still will not, but they want them to join the congregation anyway. And then there are those that still represent another side of the spectrum that I say they'll marry a man and a goat. I'm not for that. So I don't think I'll ever be there.
My impression is that almost all, maybe even all of our students now come out willing to do interfaith marriages. I haven't had a single conversation with a student that said, I'm against interfaith marriage. So that's my impression.
Hi, I want to go back to the pipeline problem. I remember 40 some odd years ago when I was in college that there was a retreat that HUC offered, and I actually think I had signed up for the retreat and at the last minute decided that I wouldn't put my math skills to waste and become a rabbi instead. But I'm curious if such a program still goes on, that you've got a seminar or a conference, and is it successful? Does it manage to get people to decide to join into the rabbinate?
And those are the two right questions to ask. So in the years leading up to my first year in this job, we were continuing to do it, and all the data was that it was no longer effective. And so we were reevaluating it, and then we had COVID. And when we get through a year where we're not canceling something, we are going to try to redo it again, because I do think that's an important pipeline program. But the truth is, the data was no longer working. The stuff that got you the invitation and that got people there was more doing the work than actually what was happening there. What happened there did transform a lot of people, but really the bulk of it was the youth group, the bulk of it was the congregation, the bulk of it was the pathway leading to that. And now we're having to scrape to find people to come, and so it no longer is nearly as effective in converting, if you will, people who might be rabbis into those who would become rabbis. We got to figure out the pipeline through those kinds of programs.
And one of the pieces of evidence that I've been hearing from colleagues is that one of the best ways to get a young person to complete his or her path through the pipeline to get to HUC is the relationship that that child has with a rabbi or a cantor, and to begin to believe that the modeling that we're doing in our congregations is something that that child can aspire to emulate in the future, and that really makes a difference. So as I said earlier, we're sort of touching those kids in special ways to help them see themselves one day perhaps as a religious leader.
And you too can have part of that job of going up to Daniel and Andrew, who you saw in the Bema, and if you see a spark saying, have you thought about this? You would make an excellent rabbi, because the truth is, it is those personal relationships that touch people that they realize this is possible for me.
Good. And Lisa.
I saw data recently that said, I believe that this is what it said, that the fastest growing group of people in our country are the non-religious, the people who are the nuns, right? Is our movement doing anything to address that? Because it's not that they're not spiritual, right? It's that distinction they're making.
Yeah, so let's begin with a clarification that, so the fastest growing group are those that don't identify as anything. And there are two kinds of people that don't identify as anything that identify as secular Jews, right? They're secular. Those that are atheist materialists, they want nothing to do with any of this, and they're just, okay, no, there's nothing that we can offer them. That's not our business. That's not our product. But then there are a whole mess of seculars that are looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for spiritual experience. They're going to Soul Cycle. They're entering yoga. And these are real things. They're seeking community, and they just aren't turned on by the language of religion. They're not turned on by the language of liturgy or the poetry. They're not inspired by it. It's just not what resonates with them. I believe HUC is in a singularly strong position to attract them because we have multiple paths of entry into our programs. We have a path through education, through a path through nonprofit management, which are Jewish values-based, that can open up a door to the tropes of spirituality, the tropes of God talk. I have to tell you, I am finding even the use of the word God. I'm back to my Reform roots in Pittsburgh, where the first Pittsburgh platform that specified that the CCAR wrote got rid of the word God. It's the source of all being. Or it's basically saying, we don't know what the heck this is about, but there's something out there we don't even know. And I actually think the talk that I gave today, where I'm explicitly using God, I sometimes give a talk like that where I just talk about the source of all being, because that is the core idea. What is it that gives rise to all of this? What is the source of all morality? What is the beginning that existed before the Big Bang? What does infinity mean? These are the things. You want a placeholder called God? Call it God, that's fine. But when you start using the word God, what our children hear, maybe your children, maybe your grandchildren, is they hear the fundamentalist Christian preacher talking about what God wants you to do, and God this, and God has been hijacked as a word. And so I think that our sensitivity to that language is another way that we can be sensitive to their search for meaning and purpose.
That's a beautiful answer. And truthfully, even as I wrote it in my book, again, I'm not selling it tonight, but you can read it, is that it's inauthentic for a rabbi to tell anybody how they must believe in God. And so there you can, I love the source of all being, or sometimes there are prayers that begin to the eternal within and beyond, because it's just an English language that we're trying to use to capture something that is indescribable. Thank you for that. That's really meaningful and helpful. Other questions? Well, what I want to do, first of all, I want to thank you for your time tonight. And Dr. Rehfeld, Melissa, and Tal. Thank you. It's getting late.
Can I introduce them just before?
Please do.
Let me just introduce you because, these things don't come about, certainly not because of anything I do. And I want to thank my team. First of all, Melissa Greenberg, who's the Vice President of Institutional Advancement. She's been here less than a year, already transforming our work and really helping us connect with communities. And Tal Rosen, who is our Senior Development Officer up in Chicago, and is here to help with our work. So thank you both.
Many thanks. And Dr. Rehfeld, really, it's just been a joy to have you here. It's really an honor to have you here, truthfully, knowing how busy you are and all the transformational work that you're doing together. It takes more than a village. It takes a meaningful and dedicated Reformed Jewish community to believe that our Reformed Jewish future really rests in those who are beginning today to be the rabbinic, cantoral, educational, and other leaders that we need. And I'm grateful that Congregation Beth Israel has been served well by rabbis, cantors, and educators and others, but we can't do it alone either. And I'm just grateful that you're here. Our work will continue, our learning will continue tomorrow morning, 9:45 a.m. in the Finger Boardroom and online. Dr. Rehfeld will lead us in Torah study. And then there'll be more time for some questions and discussion. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Rehfeld. Get a good night's sleep, and Shabbat Shalom to all of you.
An honor. Shabbat Shalom.